Hello there, Shalom. How are you all doing? A few months back, I left a comment on a video by a fairly well-known preacher or teacher, and I actually rate his teachings. Um, but I had to disagree with him on one point. I had heard him a couple of times in his lectures say that the marriage feast of Messiah takes place or starts on the Day of Trumpets, right? Now, if you're not familiar with the placings of the feasts on the Hebrew calendar, the latter feasts, the fall feasts or the autumn feasts, all take place, there's three of them, that all take place in 1 month, in the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar. The Day of Trumpets is the first day of the month. Then Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is 10 days later on the 10th. And then the 8-day-long Feast of Tabernacles starts on the 15th. Now, I've always been of the understanding that the Day of Trumpets is the day when those who are dead in Messiah rise first, and those left still alive join them to meet him in the air. 10 days later, we return with him to finish the Battle of Armageddon, and then 5 days after that, first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, he gets married. The celebration lasts a full 8 days, and it's interesting that traditionally a Jewish wedding is 8 days long, and then he sets up his kingdom with his bride. Well, this guy was saying that we get married on the Day of Trumpets, and we come back with him 10 days later. He's saying that the marriage feast is 10 days long, and we come back with him on the 10th to finish the Battle of Armageddon. And my comment was that this can't be so, because Deuteronomy 24 and verse 5 says that a man should not go to war for at least a year after taking a wife. And I explained this to him, and I have to say I was a little disappointed by his response. Instead of him saying, "Oh, thank you, Paul, for your comment. Yes, I understand where you're coming from, but," and explaining his argument. No, all he said was, "What's the spirit of the law in this case?" And he explains that and I agree with him, that the instruction is there so that a man can enjoy being with his wife and live to see any offspring from that union before going to war. Because if he went to war before that, sooner, he might not see any son or daughter that would have been born to him. I understand that. But the guy finished off saying, "Not applicable in this case." Well, he's basically saying that, and this guy is Torah observant. He keeps the feast, the Sabbath, he eats clean, etc., etc. He abides by the law of Moses. he's basically saying that this instruction is applicable to any ordinary guy, but not to Messiah. Well, my understanding is, according to Deuteronomy 29 and verse 1, that the Torah is the condition of the covenant that he has made with us. The instructions within the Torah are the conditions of the covenant that the Father has made with us. Deuteronomy 29 says, and these are the conditions, referring to the Torah, these are the conditions of the covenant I have instructed Moses to make with the children of Israel, in addition to the covenant I made with them at Horeb, or Mount Sinai. So the Torah is the covenant that he has made with us. You abide by these rules, everything will be fine. I too will abide by these rules. He has to be bound by his own law. Well, it's got me to thinking what this guy was saying. It's very, very interesting that, okay, let me start another way. Basically what he's done is he has spiritualized the law, spiritualized that instruction within the law to nullify it. He spiritualized that instruction into oblivion. Now, all through the Old Testament, even as far back as Adam, and a lot of people don't think of this, that Cain and Abel knew how to perform sacrifices. They knew what was acceptable to the Father and what wasn't. Noah knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. So they knew the Torah, but after 400 years in Egypt, the Israelites had forgotten the Torah, which was why Moses had to write it down, had to be given it afresh at Sinai and written down so that they would remember it. All the way through the Old Testament, we see people keeping the Torah, keeping the law. And it was perfectly possible to keep the law. I hear a lot of people saying, oh, well, the law was impossible to keep, and that's why Jesus did away with it, and now we just walk by the Spirit and live under grace. But Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 says, this command I'm giving you today is not too hard for you. It's not too hard. You can keep it. So it wasn't impossible. But all through the Old Testament, people were keeping the law in their own strength. It's interesting, and not many people realize this, that Pentecost, or what was correctly known in by the Hebrews as Shavuot, is the anniversary of the giving of the law at Mount Sinai and in the desert. It's very, very interesting that the Father chose that day He chose that day, the anniversary, the celebration of the anniversary of the giving of the law, the Torah. He chose that day to pour out his spirit of empowerment. You remember Yeshua said to his disciples just before he ascended, hang around in Jerusalem a few more days until you receive the helper who will empower you to be my witnesses. The Spirit. He chose that day, the anniversary of the giving of the law, to pour out his Spirit on the believers, to enable them to keep the law fully. Ezekiel 36, and let's find it. Ezekiel 36. And verse 27. Sorry, 26. And I shall give you a new heart, and put a new spirit within you. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you, and I shall cause you to walk in my laws, and guard my right rulings or judgments, and do them. Pentecost was a fulfillment of that prophecy by Ezekiel. He put his spirit within us on that day, the anniversary of the giving of the Torah, to enable us to keep it perfectly. If you keep the law, if you obey the law without the empowerment of the Spirit, you're walking in legalism. If you're trying to walk in the Spirit, but disregarding the law, well, how do you know what spirit you are walking in? Because the Torah is there to test the spirits. We are called to worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And Psalm 119 verse 142 says, your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and your law is truth. You need the spirit of the spirit of truth, the law of truth, and the spirit of truth together, the perfect union. Maybe this is why Christians so often when they come across someone who is keeping the Torah, who determines to be obedient to the Torah, maybe that is why they accuse them of being legalistic, trying to earn your own salvation, fallen from grace. Yeah, I've heard all these accusations. Yeah. I'm not being legalistic. I'm being obedient. And He has given us his Spirit to walk in righteousness. And again, from Psalm 119, verse 142, his righteousness is an everlasting righteousness. The Torah is the definition of the Father's righteousness. His righteousness is defined by the Torah. You can't separate the two. You can't separate the Spirit and the Torah. They are perfection. I hope that has explained some things. I hope it has been a blessing and an encouragement. Shalom.